I was recently in Japan, and whilst there, I set myself the challenge of buying a bunch of the cheapest cameras I could find. Japan is a beautiful country full of temples, amazing landscapes, exotic creatures, and toilets from the future that spray your ass. But you can go ahead and forget all of that because, more importantly, it's got some of the best second-hand shops I've ever seen. Treasure troves of saxophones, books, TVs, Nintendos, CD players, Nintendos, guitars, Nintendo games, toasters, and of course, Nintendos. But for me to find the cheapest cameras I can, I'm going to be concentrating here, in the junk bins. Buckets and buckets of cameras with absolutely no guarantee whether they work or not. You could go absolutely mental with the amount of cameras here, so to save me savaging my bank account and buying up everything I see, I'm going to caveat this challenge by only buying cameras that really stand out to me. Can I get some bargains, and will they even take a photo? So, saving the best till last, let's kick things off with a $3.50 Canon AE1. A ridiculous price to pay for one of these, considering I've seen them sell body only for around $60 to $100. By the looks of it, this one's shutter curtain hadn't really been having much fun and was all bunched up. But being the resourceful and technically minded fellow that I am, I fixed it by sticking my finger in it and giving it a bit of a wiggle. I got lucky with this one, and I wouldn't recommend you stick your finger in things in hopes of fixing them. But after putting a battery in this thing, I had a fully functioning, no issues Canon AE1, which I will most likely never touch again. Also, with this Canon, I found a Pentax Spotmatic SPF, also for the disgustingly low price of 500 yen or $3.50. A camera that is simply brilliant, but not particularly exciting. But it does have an M42 lens mount, which means that you can throw on a Helios 44 and bore people that don't care that
they used the Helios 44 to shoot some of the Batman.
In all honesty, these cameras aren't very expensive, but they're definitely not $3.50 cheap. This next camera is shockproof, dustproof, waterproof, and best of all, idiot-proof. With just a power button and a mode button to toggle through flash settings, it's pretty simple. It was originally marketed to construction workers so they could document the progress on their building sites, thus the need for it being able to take a hammering. Maybe literally if someone's having a bad day. It's big and ugly, but the lens does have this protective cover that sort of looks like a porthole on an old ship or a diver's helmet, so it gets points back for that. In hindsight, buying a camera that's natural habitat are conditions that would break a normal camera doesn't really sound like a good idea. If it had fulfilled its purpose of being bashed about and used as a beater, then the fact that it was now sat in a parts bin should probably have been a big old alarm bell for me to stay away. Of course, all this logical thinking occurred to me after I bought it, so it's probably lucky that it was only 2,200 yen, $14 or 11 quid, whichever you prefer. These seem to sell for between $60 to $100, so if it works, I'm onto a winner. This camera is a lot like the fragrance Sex Panther, in the sense that
60% of the time, it works every time.
It can't really decide if it wants to play ball or not. Erring on the side of caution, I put a test roll in this, and it's lucky I did because it just gobbled it up like some sort of gutsy little piggy. But the second time, it must have decided it was full and it started to behave. So with this camera being a total tease and playing me hot and cold, I decided that I didn't want to waste any money by feeding it a fresh roll of film. So instead it got stale, horrible, expired Superdrug film from 2005. I did, however, put a little bit of tape over the DX code on the canister to try and force the camera to shoot it at 100 ISO instead of the film's 200 ISO, and try and overexpose it a little bit to hopefully compensate for all those years that this film's been sat in the back of some nan's cupboard. This is definitely one of the cameras of all time. It is incredibly adequate and does an amazingly mediocre job. Maybe that is a bit of a harsh criticism. I mean, I did feed it trash film and expected it to turn it into art. Maybe it's too much to ask from a camera for it to not only be as tough as a tank, but also take some of the sharpest images I've ever seen. But I will say this, I'm definitely guilty of babying my camera gear, so it's nice to have something that I really don't mind giving a hard time. Something that I can take anywhere and not give a shit about because it was cheap and it can take a good pounding. Like your mum. Being in Japan, I thought I should probably pick up a Nikon, a camera brand I've never really been interested in before. Nikon shooters seem to get a lot of hate on the internet, which I've never really understood. I used to work with a photographer that shot on Nikon, and his images were always excellent after he'd licked each of his lenses clean. I picked this camera in particular because it was missing the surround around the buttons that tells you what everything does. My thinking was that maybe it just ended up in the parts bin because of this superficial issue. And do you know what? I was totally wrong. Putting a battery in this thing not only made it shoot its lens out for the last time, but also summoned a horrific nightmare fuel noise. Unfortunately, I didn't get a recording of the actual sound, but it was a bit like... Never before have I heard anything make a noise that so undoubtedly told me that it was totally mashed. Maybe there's a small chance I can fix this, but that would mean putting a battery back in it and subjecting myself to the death rattle of 1980s consumer electronics, and I am not prepared to do that for this Nikon. This next camera is by far the cheapest I found in Japan, and definitely the cheapest camera that I've ever bought. Now, it's not great. Hey, it's not even good, but it was only 68 cents, and I challenge anyone to find a camera that actually takes a photo for 68 cents. This is a Topico 2-way. On the face of it, it just looks like your garden variety, disposable spec, crappy toy camera. But we could not be more wrong. I mean, it is a piece of shit, but the level of design and features on this piece of shit make me think that they were actually trying hard when they were putting it together. Lots of toy cameras out there have just a disgustingly low level of thought put into them. This is slightly better. A film window on the back so you can actually see what's loaded. Hey, even my Leica doesn't have that. A hot shoe, which will actually trigger a flash. The folding film winder has absolutely no business being this complex, and being made of the cheapest plastic known to man, there's no way this thing doesn't break after 3 or 4 uses. And then finally, and the reason why this camera is called the 2-way, a little switch on the bottom that puts this camera into panoramic mode. And just look at the action on that sliding mask. Being the colossal idiot that I am, I decided that this should be the camera that I load up and test whilst in Japan. And I hate past me for making that decision, but my reasoning was that this camera is so simple. Surely it's got to work. I guess in many ways I was right. This camera did work, but in an infinite number of other ways, this being the camera that I actually use in Japan was just a horrible idea. This lens is, what's the word I'm looking for? Shit. I guess these images do have a certain low-mo, lo-fi sort of charm to them, but I can't help but wonder how much nicer it would have been to capture this good boy on a camera that was way more capable. Something with maybe more than 1 shutter speed, perhaps. One thing I do love to hate about this camera is the mask for the panoramic mode. Not a clean line in sight. It looks like someone's been chewing on it. That's how cheaply this thing is made. Now, you don't need to fly all the way to Japan to get yourself some new gear thanks to this week's sponsor, Buyee. There are some items that are just too hard or too expensive to buy outside of Japan, and this is where Buyee comes in. They are a service that can place orders or bid for you on Japanese shopping or auction sites. This includes sites like Yahoo Japan Auctions, Mercari, and Rakuten. They have the items shipped to them and then they ship them to you, which means that you can avoid some of the price hikes and get access to items that some Japanese sellers don't want to ship internationally. They ship out worldwide with a load of different shipping methods and a load of different payment methods, so you can find the right one for you. Buyee is easy to use and has support in several different languages, one of which is of course English, so instantly that's made things a lot easier. So if you're in the market for some new Japanese camera gear, then check out Buyee and maybe get your hands on some stuff at a more affordable price. Also, if you sign up using the link in the description below, Buyee will give you a coupon for 10% off your first purchase. Right, back to these junk bins. Canon FT. Bought solely because last time I did one of these cheap camera challenges, this is what I ended up with. Okay, cool, yep, moving on. I expected to see a lot more digital cameras in these shops, but there was a surprising lack of them. Maybe they've all been snapped up in the digicam craze. There were digital cameras, but they were all pretty expensive, and they had more retro camcorders than you could shake a VHS at. But I'm not quite ready to go down that rabbit hole yet, so I left them for someone else. But instead, I bought this wild card, a Game Boy Pocket camera. $8 seems pretty cheap to me, but to be honest, I have zero experience with these things. Never owned one, never used one. This didn't work at first, but after a good wet blow, probably can't say that, it was up and running. With no previous experience with this camera, I expected the images to just be a mass of pixels with no discernible resemblance of what they're actually photos of, and yeah, I'm pretty much right. This isn't bad though, considering this is a toy from 1998. The lens swivels as well, so it predates any front-facing camera on a phone, and is potentially responsible for teaching a good few millennials how to take a selfie. Obviously, this copy is from Japan, so it's in Japanese. This means that I have absolutely no idea what it says on the screen, and I just sort of mash the buttons until something happens. Sort of like how I edit these videos. When researching how to get these images off of the Game Boy without the use of a printer, which I refuse to buy, I learned that there are whole groups of people that are dedicated to using this as a serious camera, and I hope that I never meet any of you. In the end, I got the photos off in the easiest, simplest, dirtiest way I could think of. Not gonna lie, I actually think these scans kinda slap. The Game Boys really brought out the despair in my eyes. Back when they gave a shit about film photography instead of just simulating it, Fujifilm came out with this camera, the Cardia Height Date, or maybe better known as the DL300. And then 38 years later, I'm here buying it for 550 yen. The DL stands for drop-in loading and refers to the way that you load film. Is it easier? Probably not. This camera does, however, do that genius thing of winding the whole roll of film out of its canister and then putting it back as you take the photos. So if you open the back by accident, you don't burn everything that you've shot. I think this camera looks the bollocks. Fujifilm has a habit of churning out some real sleek looking shooters, and although it doesn't really matter what your camera looks like, it definitely helps with enthusiasm when using it. This camera had a loose front flap. Yep, same. I cracked it open and made it marginally better, and apart from that, this camera seems to work just fine. Unfortunately, time is a cruel mistress, and I haven't had a chance to send a proper roll of film through this thing to see what it's like, so instead I'm going to delegate and gift this to Feetsy. Congratulations, you left a comment once upon a time, and now I'll send you this camera and some film. Look how good this camera is. Compact, dials right where you want them, a bunch of shooting modes, a built-in flash, decent autofocus, EOS mount so you have a wide range of lenses, all ruined by the fact that this camera takes discontinued APS film. And I knew that before I bought it, and yet here we are. I really honestly don't know what possessed me to get this. Maybe jet lag. But when I saw it sat there looking all fancy, it seemed like a great idea. Maybe I'll make a video about shooting APS film and then take that video and throw it in the ocean, because surely nobody shoots APS. Here's a camera you might not have seen before. The Fujifilm Fotorama 90 Ace instant camera. The film for which does not exist. Totally brown bread since 2010. There might be the odd pack floating around with an extortionate price tag. So you're probably asking me, why did you buy this then, you mug? Well, me and this camera have a bit of a history. I haven't had an instant camera since I was about 10 years old, and when I learned about these cameras, I, for some unexplainable, stupid reason, got it in my head that this camera would be a good choice to get back into it. And you can imagine my delight when I learned that there is a very talented person making adapters for these Fotorama cameras so that they can take the readily available and reasonably priced Instax film. So I bought the only Fotorama camera that was in the country at the time, a Robo Ace, and an adapter. I got super excited thinking of all the instant bangers I was going to shoot, and then my parade got totally pissed on when it turned out that camera was a dud and it just wouldn't fire. I gave up on the lot and I parked the idea. Until now, for 1,100 yen, I had to bring this back with me in hopes of some sort of redemption. And I'm so glad I did, because this camera, left for dead in a parts bin, works perfectly. I don't know how they compare to other instant cameras, but this does seem to pump out some decent photos. Made all the sweeter knowing that it's reviving an abandoned, forgotten camera. A bold statement, but this is the only camera you ever need. The Minolta Capios 25, aka the Minolta Freedom Zoom Explorer, aka the Minolta Riva 70W, aka Chunk Boy Big Shots. I did make one of them up. 28 to 70 zoom, a date back that I can't seem to adjust, flash settings, picture profiles, a panoramic mode. Shit man, you tell me a camera that can do all of that for $15. The lens cover and flip up flash action is second to none. This thing gets its kit off and flops one out in record time. It's worth the money just to press the on-off button over and over and over again and see this thing spring into action. And the lens really isn't bad either. Not out of this world, I mean it is still a zoom lens, so it's going to be a little bit on the shitty side, but for the most part it does a great job. This camera is a little bit of a cheese sandwich. Like, you can throw it in your bag, no issue, but it's just a little bit too big to have in your back pocket. Unfortunately, the panoramic switch on this has broken, but fake panoramic masks are bullshit, so I'm not really that bothered. This absolute gem was 2,200 yen. The price tag come with a bunch of warnings about not powering on, the LCD screen not working, and the viewfinder being haunted by the spirit of a mischievous raccoon. My Google Translate may have got that one wrong. But as it turns out, none of that was apparently true, and I put a battery in this thing and it powered up faultlessly. This camera is called a Samurai, which might just be the most Japanese name for a camera ever, so I didn't really have any choice but to buy it. When you think of a Samurai, you think of fast, agile, stealthy. Ironically, none of the words I would use to describe this camera. What they should have called it is the Greasy Sumo, because this fatty is a bit of a mission to hold and you definitely need to get two hands on it. This is a half frame camera, which I hope you can work out from the name, means it squeezes your image into half the frame of a 35mm negative. This means that you get twice the amount of photos that you would to a roll at the cost of half the resolution it would be at standard 35. With my past limited experience with half frame cameras, they're a lot like low fat cake. Low fat means you can have more, but you don't really want to because it's shit. This camera might be the exception though, because they were not messing around with the lens they put on this thing. Way better than you'd think for only using half of the frame. I'm so impressed in fact that I might continue to use this camera and not subject it to a fate of gathering dust sat on my shelf. I honestly fully expected to hate this thing when I bought it, but it has won me over. The photos are good, it handles pretty well once you get used to it. It's actually an SLR, so composition is just that much easier, and it's got integrated technology, whatever the hell that means. But the thing that really sold it to me is the sound. Point and shoots generally make a sound like they're trying to die, but the noise this thing makes when taking a photo is just begging me to send as many rolls as possible straight through it. I think if you're new to film photography and you want a camera that isn't going to annihilate your wallet, and the thought of learning how to manually expose a photo just makes you want to cry, then you could do a lot worse than buying one of these. Not a bad haul considering the price, and that is it, the end of the video. Good job guys, see you later.